we want to dig into a little bit further and start off the show with, and that's with regards to the education system. Now, the Prime Minister's comments have gotten a bit more attention, which I think is a good thing, because regardless of what you think of the man, and maybe even how he presented the situation with regards to the education system potentially having deficiencies that could lead more young people to a life of crime. Okay, the fact of the matter is this is something that quite a few stakeholders, whether they're on the education side, the crime fighting side, or other parts of society, this is something that's been coming up. And we've reached a point where now, usually the government does not like to admit that there's issues with the system, but the Prime Minister, for all intents and purposes, he didn't necessarily go into too much detail, Janelle, but he did mention that the system has issues. People are being left behind. And off camera, you were mentioning to me something that I did not know. I was honestly oblivious to this, that, before 2000, or the year 2000 or so, the education system, the transition from primary school to secondary school was different. Yes. It was not automatic, as I assumed it was. I just never really thought about it. And that perhaps, at least for me, that changes my perspective on things. Maybe it might remind people the way how things used to be and might change their perspective on things. But it was not automatic. And it maybe gives the Prime Minister's words a bit more weight.
Yes. Well, am I showing my age then? Because before 2000, there were between 8,000 and 10,000 children who wrote the SEA were not placed. It's under the Pandey administration in 2000 that we now have what is called free universal secondary education. So in 2000, a decision was made by that regime that every student who wrote the SEA had to be placed in a secondary school. Of course, that was a big debate at that time. Arguments were made about, well, where you putting these children? The result was 10 or 11 new schools were built in that year. Other new schools were built after that. The government at that time also chose to pay for children to go private secondary schools. So this education system that has been a problem. One of the issues as well arising out of that was the acknowledgement that some of these children who we used to call failed common entrance failed because they actually didn't make the grade. So it was a matter of number of places available, and also some of these children were not ready to enter into secondary education because they were making less than 30%, and that's still an issue today. So at that time, the government would have developed what they call model schools. I don't know if you remember the Russell Latapy School, the Excel Composite School. So they developed certain schools where the program was geared towards preparing children who may not have made the required grade to get a secondary education, instead of just basically what used to happen, which was they just didn't used to go to school.
Now, that brings me to two questions. The first of which is really and truly, how did society deal with that sort of situation? Because to some extent, it actually, that as an alternative does sound worse. If you just, no context, it's a black hole, we don't necessarily know what's going to happen. And perhaps now we've reached the point where, well, we've gotten used over the last 23 years of not having to deal with a situation where we have 8,000 kids not in the secondary school system. Perhaps society, it's a lot of informal arrangements that might have dealt with it, and society is not necessarily prepared to turn that clock back. And of course, the other thing is, what now is the reason? Why is it that it seems as though we just could never catch up to that figure, that gap that existed? It seems as though we've been making schools every year. We've been trying to catch up with renovations of existing schools, building new schools, getting more teachers. It's been 23 years, and I can't necessarily remember a time when, we were able to sit back and say, well, the education system is settled, it's stable, and we don't have to worry about certain logistical things now. It seems as though those logistical things have been ongoing, and we're still seeing the failure to get the system's capacity up there.
But was the Prime Minister's statement geared towards something logistical? I thought his statement was one that was apodictic, meaning, to me, it's beyond debate that there's a negative correlation between lower educational achievement, a negative correlation between education and crime, meaning the lower your educational attainment, the higher it is you are likely to enter into a life of crime. So to me, that many studies have shown that.
Well,
so I'm not sure what it is that...
He directly did reference the fact
Yes.
of the automatic advancement.
Right.
He was reported to have said, well, look, it's more or less along the same lines.
Yes.
Some kids are just not ready.
Yes.
And then he questioned, well, look, it doesn't seem as though the system has the ability now that you take them into secondary school and they're behind and there's no mechanisms, or at least no effective ones, that last part I'm paraphrasing, to allow them to catch up. Because he asked, well, what curriculum should you teach them at that point?
Well,
secondary curriculum that they're not ready for, or you go back to primary?
Well, I found that part I found was a bit clunky and a bit strange that he would say that, because the Ministry of Education actually has, and I'm quoting the exact name, revised operational plan for 26 secondary schools. The revised one now captures 2022 to 2027. And these are 26 secondary schools that have been identified to have been allocated the students who perform the least successfully, I'm trying to phrase this delicately at SEA. And there's a whole plan geared towards assisting these children, including modifying the Form 1 and Form 2 curriculum to treat with any deficiencies they would have. So those children in Form 1 and 2 are actually prepared for what is called a lower secondary proficiency examination. So they are taught subjects, maths, English, some technical subjects. So they are not really taught the subjects that I would have experienced in what we describe as a prestige school. So the plan is tailored towards them, so that at the end of Form 2, they take this exam, and they can either have this certificate and go off and enter the world of work after the age of 16, because education, you must be in school until 16, that is the law in our country. Or they are now ready to take on a more, the regular, if you want to say, curriculum. And in those schools, there are other systems in place to help them, because it is recognized that poor educational achievement is a multifaceted problem. So in those schools, they have dedicated guidance counselors, they have safety officers, the security officers are on point. So there's a lot that is tailored towards these 26 schools. So I found it very strange that...
Well, because you're pointing out that we have the programs. Now,
Yes.
first of all, in any nation, you could have programs and people can slip through cracks. A significant proportion can slip through cracks. But the fact of the matter is the results, we're not necessarily seeing the results. So I could actually see that the Prime Minister, he was speaking in the capacity of a politician who, he's not the Minister of Education, so I won't necessarily go to fault him, why you don't know the X, Y, and Z. He can't know every single detail of every different subsector of the government's operations. So I could forgive him for just having a general opinion. But at the end of the day, it's the system itself. I believe the president of Tutor, he has more or less said that it was about time the Prime Minister acknowledged the education system is broken. Okay, that's nice. Where are the marches? Where's the concern coming out from other stakeholders? The irony is the Prime Minister is one of the few people, I think, that has gone on the record to kind of say it in this way. In this particular way that now it makes you think we have a systemic problem yes, we have programs, but I don't know if it's because of crime that's maybe highlighting the deficiencies. I feel as though the deficiencies have always been there. It's just that it's boiling over now.
The deficiencies have always been there, and I actually was listening to a debate, and it's a PDF, so I put it to read it to me out loud while I was driving. It was a debate in Parliament in 2000 called Education, Purpose and Philosophy. So a question was posed to the then Minister of Education, who was the Honorable, it was Kamala Prasad at the time. She was the Minister of Education at the time, asking that regime at the time, what are you all doing? What is your philosophy on education? And some of these same issues were raised about the literacy rate of certain students, placement, the strain on the system in terms of crowding, not overcrowding, and all the same issues that we're having now was addressed. So it's been 23 years later, a different government, similar problem. And as I said, I still found it strange that the Prime Minister would say that. I know you're saying he doesn't have oversight, or he may not have insight into every ministry, but you are the leader of the cabinet. So you must have an idea, the issue of cracks or breaks or deficiencies in our education system would come to your knowledge, and your minister, you don't have to have a whole in depth, but just like I know that there's a program,
Right.
surely you would know that too.
Right, right. I mean, it could be one of the things that the pandemic, political communication in pandemic is a very good example of how politicians would basically end up being called liars because they're trying to summarize and generalize and make things a lot easier for the wide general public to accept or to understand. So I don't know if it was a communication thing where he was just trying to, boil things down to the basics because he didn't want to spend time talking about all the minutiae, or if it was a case where, he should know, but nobody reported it to him, or he just didn't care to know. Like, I'm not looking to, or he did,
I don't know.
like, I'm not looking to pass judgment necessarily on that. Of course, now we could examine it further based on how he further communicates on the issue, because that's more telling. You don't open a can of worms and then stay at the same level of awareness, right? Once it becomes a bigger issue, that when I say a bigger issue as how we treat it in the conversation.
I expect the next question, if I was in the opposition or anybody in society. So the Prime Minister has recognized there's a problem where certain children, the education system may not, according to him, be tailored towards them. Then my question will be, well, what are you doing? Because, or what is the Ministry of Education doing? And as I said, they are doing something. It's there. You can go on the Ministry of Education website.
How old are those programs?
This particular one it speaks to revised operational plan for 26 secondary schools. The one I read was actually 2022 to 2027. So this one was revised this year. So
right,
there was
but it started last year.
No, but there was an operational plan before. But I think they had to revise it given what happened with COVID and other issues. So they've revised. So this is just a revised one. So these, I am assuming, revised mean that these schools, there was already operational plan. But we had to revise it because of X, Y, and Z. So now the plan that we have in place is from 2022 to 2027. But there was always a plan before.
Now, neither of us will know the actual budgetary figures and all of those details. But
budgetary figures for, not Ministry of Education, you mean?
Well,
I mean, because we could get the budgetary figures.
Well, no, what I mean to say, how the money is spent, how many schools, all of those breakdowns, right? Right. So, at some point, we're just not going to, we don't know, right? But
you can make a freedom of information request.
Well, but just a general question now, I guess, to me, at the very beginning, the most obvious solutions would be based on two basic thoughts. One would be, okay, it seems as though we don't have enough money, or we're not spending enough money because there's always behind on repairs and construction, and do we have enough teachers? So we could increase the budget allocation, which is already the largest budget allocation in national budget. The second basic idea that you could go down is, well, the students aren't ready, so let's not try to force square pegs into round holes. What are the alternatives that we could either look and see what we did before, right? How did society treat the students? Which, I mean, just because of the advancement might be even more complex and no longer viable. Or is there alternatives that we could, that the nation, society could accept? But you see, the age of the students, I find, makes it very difficult.
Because a lot of these students, by the time some of them would have already repeated a class in primary school, some of them would have resat common entrance already. So by the time they go into Form 1, they're already 13 and 14. So by the time Form 2, a lot of them reach the age where it's mandatory, 16 by Form 2, 3 already. And then, they are not required to remain in school.
Right.
So that's the question. But I think when I read the revised operational plan, I think it sounded really good. But the question always is, we have a plan. How is the implementation going? Yeah. And there's never really enough information on what assessment we did of the plan, and this is the results we found. We found that more students, there was an improved literacy rate, there was we don't know what happens, what is the result of these plans, and that's my problem. I think we are a nation, we always come up with excellent plans. Everybody knows what the issue is. We have great ideas to fix the issue. We even start the implementation, but the assessing along the way.
Sustaining it.
Maintaining it, the assessment, adjustments. Well, I don't know. You never know. What is the result?
Folks, we're going to have to take a break. I do find this is something I wish that the teachers union would have spoken out a lot sooner on as one of the primary stakeholders, because they know better than anybody with regards to the curriculum and how that is going for their students, of which I still have significant concerns from the primary level. And in this hyper-competitive world, I am afraid of what the potential solutions, the unintended consequences might be, because just like how the murder rate waits for no man, well, the education system waits for no generation as they have to age and progress and develop. And if we take too long with their development, then they end up potentially, as the very young men with no opportunities, looking for some way out, not just necessarily the easy way out. At that point now, ethically speaking, how much blame could we really put on them if we're the ones that's failing them from the very beginning?